Welcome to the channel where legends sleep. Tonight's story takes us to the sun-warmed marble and honeyed air of ancient Rome, where poets like Apuleius once pressed their quill to parchment and gave the world one of its most enduring tales of love and suffering. It is a story the Romans told of a girl too beautiful for her own safety, a palace that shimmered without a single stone she could name, and a husband whose face she was forbidden, above all else, to see. There are tasks in this story that seem impossible. There are gods who meddle, and one goddess in particular, whose jealousy burns hotter than any mortal flame. And there is a young woman, fragile and terrified, who walks into the darkness anyway. Something waits for her on the other side of all that suffering. Something that will cost her everything before it is finally, breathlessly, hers. So lie back, breathe slowly, and let the ancient world take over. There is a story so old that it has been told in 100 languages, beneath 100 different skies, and yet it never grows tired in the telling. It begins, as so many of the oldest stories do, with something very simple. A girl so beautiful that the world did not know what to do with her. Her name was Psyche, and she was the youngest daughter of a king whose kingdom sat somewhere along the warm coast of the ancient world, where olive trees grew silver in the afternoon light, and the sea was always just visible from the palace walls. The king had 3 daughters. The 2 eldest were lovely enough, bright-eyed, graceful, easy to admire. They were married off in good time to good men, and that was that. But Psyche was different. Psyche was the kind of beautiful that stopped people mid-sentence, that made merchants forget what they were selling, that made old women put down their work and simply stare. People came from distant cities just to look at her. They came on roads thick with summer dust, having left behind their homes and their ordinary lives, drawn forward by rumors that somewhere in this kingdom there was a girl whose face was worth the journey. And when they arrived and saw her walking in the garden or standing at the palace gate, many of them wept, not from sadness, but from something they could not name, the feeling of having glimpsed something that did not quite belong to the mortal world. And here is where the trouble began, because those same travelers, those pilgrims who had crossed mountains and sailed long stretches of sea, began to forget to stop at the temples. They walked past the altars of Aphrodite without leaving so much as a flower. They arrived in towns where the goddess's shrines stood fragrant with incense and garlanded with roses, and they kept walking. They had already seen what they came to see. Why trouble a goddess, they seemed to think, when a mortal girl wore divinity so plainly on her face? This, as you might imagine, did not please Aphrodite. She was the goddess of love and beauty, born from the sea foam, older than most of the Olympians in her power, if not in her memory. She had been worshipped since the first human heart had stirred toward longing. Temples had been raised in her name. Whole harvests of roses had been offered to her. She had never needed to share that devotion, and she did not intend to start now. The goddess stood one afternoon on a high terrace of Olympus and looked down at the world below, at the winding roads, the small fires of human settlements, the boats on the blue water, and she watched the streams of people moving toward one little kingdom on the coast. She watched them bypass her altars. She felt the worship thinning, like warmth leaving a room. She was not a cruel goddess, not by nature, but she was proud, and pride, when it is wounded deeply enough, can harden into something very close to cruelty. She called for her son. Cupid came to her as he always did, swift and unhurried at once, the way a wind moves, as if he had been nearby all along and was simply choosing now to be visible. He was beautiful himself in the way of young divine things, and he carried with him always the small golden bow that was the instrument of so much of the world's longing and grief. He loved his mother. He also knew her moods well. She took him by the hand and led him to the edge of the terrace, where the sky fell open, wide and pale and endless, and she pointed down to the kingdom on the coast. "Find her," Aphrodite said. "Find this mortal girl who dares to steal my worship, and use your arrow. Make her fall in love with something wretched, something low, a creature of the earth that no one could admire. Let her beauty be wasted on ugliness, and let the world see that no mortal should wear a goddess's face." Cupid looked down at the world below. He was quiet for a moment, the way a river is quiet before it bends. Then he agreed, and he went. Meanwhile, in the palace by the sea, Psyche knew nothing of any of this. She went about her days as she always had, which is to say, surrounded by wonder and quietly, persistently alone. For here was this strange and sorrowful truth of her life. Everyone admired her, and no one wished to marry her. She was too much, too luminous. Men who came to court her found, when they were finally in her presence, that they could not imagine being her husband. One does not marry a thing that makes one feel so small. And so they bowed and smiled and returned home to choose someone easier to love. Her sisters had husbands. Her sisters had houses of their own, and ordinary mornings, and arguments about small things. Psyche had only her beauty and the growing sense that it had somehow become a cage. Her father, the king, grew worried. He was a man who loved his daughters, and he could see that something was wrong, not in the way that could be fixed with a feast or a new dress, but in the deeper way. The kind of wrong that asks for an answer from the gods. And so he sent messengers to the great oracle at Delphi, that ancient smoke-filled place where the future leaked through stone, and the answers were never quite what you hoped for. The oracle's answer came back within the week. The king read it alone by lamplight, and his face changed as he read. What color it drained to, no one who saw him afterward could say. Only that when he emerged from that room, he looked like a man who had been handed a grief he had not yet learned to carry. The oracle had spoken, and what it said would change everything. The oracle had said this, that Psyche was not meant for any man of mortal blood. She was to be dressed as a bride and led to the highest cliff above the city, and there, left alone, whatever came for her would come from the sky. The oracle had used words that suggested a serpent, a darkness, something ancient and without mercy. The king was instructed not to weep. He wept anyway. And so it was that on a still morning, when the sea below the cliffs lay flat and silver, Psyche was dressed in white. Her sisters stood back. They could not look at her for long. Her mother pressed her hands between her own and said nothing, because there was nothing that words could reach. Psyche herself was calm in the way that very frightened people sometimes become calm, not because the fear had left her, but because it had grown so large that she had stepped somehow into the quiet at its center. They walked her to the clifftop. The whole city came as if for a wedding, though no one sang. Flowers were scattered on the path, and incense burned at the foot of the cliff, and all of it felt horribly like celebration. When they reached the edge, her father held her for a long moment. His arms shook. Then he stepped away, and the procession retreated down the hill, and Psyche stood alone at the top of the world, with the wind moving through her hair and nothing before her but open air and the long, indifferent sky. She waited. The wind, which had been gentle, began to shift. It gathered around her slowly, not all at once, but in the way that warmth gathers near a fire, first at the edges, then closer, until she felt it on all sides. It was not cold. It was not frightening exactly, though she could not have said why. It moved beneath her feet, beneath the hem of her white dress, beneath her arms. And then, quietly, impossibly, the ground was gone. She was rising, not falling, rising cradled in the arms of something she could not see, carried as gently as a leaf lifted from still water. Below her the cliff shrank, and the city and the silver sea. Above her the sky opened wide and pale. She did not scream. She held very still and let herself be carried, because there was nothing else to do, and because whatever held her felt, in some deep and wordless way, like it meant her no harm. The wind bore her for a long time across hills and rivers and through the cool shadows of clouds, and when at last it set her down, she was in a valley she had never seen and could not have found again on any map. The valley was lush and hushed. Soft grass cushioned her feet. Trees lined its edges like the walls of a room. And through the trees came a light that seemed to have no particular source. Not sunlight exactly, but something warmer and more even, as if the air itself remembered the sun. And there was a palace. She saw it all at once, though somehow she felt she had been seeing it for longer than that, as if it had always been there, just past the edge of knowing. It stood at the far end of the valley, vast and pale, its walls made of something that caught the light and held it, not quite stone and not quite marble, but something finer than either. Columns rose along its face, gardens spilled around its base, heavy with blossoms she had no names for. A doorway stood open, and warm light poured from within. Psyche walked toward it. What else was there to do? Inside, everything was impossible. The floors were the colors of deep water. The ceilings were painted with stories she could almost read, but not quite, as if they belonged to a language just beyond the reach of memory. Tables were set with food and wine, candles burned in long gold-lit rows. Everything was ready, as if someone had been expecting her, and yet the palace was silent. No servants moved through its halls. No voice called out to greet her. And yet she did not feel alone. That was the strange thing. The place felt inhabited in some way she could not name. A warmth in the air, a sense that the rooms breathed, that the silence was not emptiness, but patience. She ate. She bathed in water that was already warm and scented with something like rain and green wood. She lay down in a bed so soft it seemed to have been made for sleep alone. And she slept, deeply and without dreams, which surprised her when she woke to think of it. Because she was not alone when she woke. The room was dark, fully dark, not the dark of a curtained window, but the dark of a night without moon or candle, a darkness made with intention. And from within that darkness came a voice. It was a calm voice, low and unhurried, without edge. It said her name the way someone says the name of a thing they have been thinking about for a long time. She sat up in the dark and listened. The voice told her that this was her home now, that she would lack for nothing here, that she would be cared for and spoken to and kept warm. It told her gently that it could not show itself to her, not yet, not in the light, and that she must accept this. It did not explain why. It only asked her quietly if she was willing to stay. Psyche was quiet for a moment. The dark pressed softly around her. The voice waited without urgency, as if it had all the patience in the world and was glad to spend it. She said yes. She did not fully know why she said it, perhaps because the voice held no threat. Perhaps because she had nowhere else to go. Perhaps because something in her, despite everything, the cliff, the white dress, the loss of everything she had known, felt beneath all of it the faint and inexplicable warmth of something like curiosity. And so it was that Psyche made her home in the palace at the edge of the world. The days passed in a quiet luxury she had not asked for and could not entirely refuse. The unseen servants, for servants there were, somehow, though she never saw them, brought her food and music and whatever she seemed to want before she had quite finished wanting it. The gardens were hers to walk in. The library held books in a dozen tongues. The light that filled the valley had a quality of permanence, as if time moved differently here, slowly and without urgency. And each night, when the candles were extinguished and the darkness settled full and soft across the room, the voice returned. They talked. Night after night they talked about small things and large ones, about the world she had come from and the strange new world she inhabited now. The voice was curious about her. It listened well. Sometimes it laughed softly, and the sound of it in the dark was like finding warmth where none had been expected. Psyche began to look forward to the dark. She did not yet know what that meant. She only knew that the days were beautiful and empty, and the nights, strange as they were, felt full. And somewhere beneath the mystery of it all, beneath the invisible hands and the sourceless light and the voice that would not show itself, something was slowly, quietly beginning to grow. And so it was that days became weeks, and weeks softened into something Psyche had no name for, a kind of life she had not imagined possible, tucked between the sunlit hours and the whispering dark. But happiness, when it is kept secret, has a way of drawing the world toward it. Her sisters came. She had not asked for them. She had not even known she missed them until the west wind carried their voices down to her. One afternoon, thin and searching, calling her name from somewhere high above. The sound of it opened something in her chest. A door she had not known was closed. She went to her husband that night and wept, quietly asking only to see them, to know they were safe. And he, whose voice was always gentle in the dark, relented. He always relented when she wept. She would come to understand later that this, too, was a kind of love and a kind of sorrow. The sisters descended on the west wind the following morning, and the palace received them as it received everything, with impossible, silent grace. They walked through the halls with wide eyes and tight mouths. They touched the marble columns and the golden tables and the fountains that ran without source. They ate food that appeared at the thought of it, and drank wine that never emptied. And all the while Psyche watched them, and she saw something shift behind their eyes, something small and cold and green, like a shoot of bitterness pushing up through stone. They asked about her husband. She told them only what she knew, that he was kind, that he came to her in darkness, that she had never seen his face. She said it simply, without shame, because in truth she had grown almost used to it. But her sisters did not hear it simply. They turned the words over between them like a stone with a sharp edge. "He comes only at night," they said. "He will not show his face. Do you not wonder why? Do you not remember what the oracle said, that you were destined for a monstrous thing, a serpent, a terror that flies and stings? What if that is exactly what he is, and he has merely been kind enough to hide it from you? What if the darkness is not mystery, but mercy, his mercy covering something you would not wish to see?" Psyche told them to stop. She told them she was happy, but the seed was already in the ground. They left her with a lamp and a knife, pressed into her hands as gifts, as love, as concern, and the west wind carried them back up into the world above. And Psyche stood alone in the great entrance of the palace, holding those two small objects, feeling the warmth of the place around her, and something new beneath it, something cool, something that had not been there before. That night, she was quieter than usual. Her husband noticed, as he always did, and asked her in his low and careful voice whether something troubled her. She said no. She said she was only tired. She lay still beside him in the dark until his breathing slowed and deepened, and the night grew very quiet around them both. Then she rose. She had hidden the lamp behind the curtain at the far edge of the room. She crossed the floor without a sound, the marble cold beneath her bare feet, the air very still, and she lifted it. Her hand trembled as she struck the light. The flame rose small and steady, and she turned back toward the bed. She did not know what she expected to see. A monster, perhaps, or nothing at all. Some trick of shadow and voice, some enchantment without a body. Or perhaps some face she would not recognize, strange and vast and awful. What she saw was none of those things. He was beautiful, more beautiful than she was, some distant part of her noted, and she had been called the loveliest thing in the mortal world. He lay with one arm curled beneath his head, his dark hair fallen soft across his brow, his face so still and young and unguarded in sleep that it seemed almost wrong to look at him. And there, folded against his shoulders, she had to look twice to believe them. Wings, white as sea foam, gentle as held breath, tucked close as a sleeping bird's. She understood then, all at once, in the way that understanding sometimes comes not as a slow light, but as a sudden flooding warmth. Cupid, the god of love himself. And he had chosen the dark so she would not know him, so she would not fear him or worship him or love him only because he was what he was. He had wanted to be loved in the ordinary way, in the way of unseen things, in the dark. She leaned closer, drawn by something she could not name, wanting only to see his face more clearly, wanting to hold the moment a little longer. And the lamp tipped. A single drop of oil, no larger than a tear, fell from the flame. It landed on his shoulder. He woke. For a moment, one long suspended moment, they simply looked at each other. His eyes, open now, were the color of deep water. They moved from the lamp to her face, and what she saw in them was not anger. It was something quieter than that, and harder to bear. It was grief. She tried to speak. His name was already on her lips. But he rose from the bed and moved toward the window, and the wings that had lain so still, in sleep, opened wide and carried him up and away, into the dark beyond the curtain, into the night beyond the palace, until there was nothing left of him but the faint, warm scent of something golden and the small burn of the oil still cooling on the floor. The palace began to change. Slowly at first, the lights dimming one by one, the fountains growing quiet, the warmth pulling back from the walls like a tide going out. The music that had always lingered somewhere just beyond hearing went silent. The invisible hands that had dressed her and arranged her table and brought her flowers in the morning hours. Gone, all of them, as though they had never been. Psyche stood at the edge of the empty room with the lamp still in her hand. The flame had gone out. She did not remember when. And then she was outside. She did not know how, only that the palace was behind her and the ground was beneath her feet, and the cold of the open world wrapped itself around her like something deliberate. The sky was still dark. The wind that had always been gentle with her moved past without stopping, and she understood that it would not carry her anywhere now. She sat down on the ground, on the cold earth at the edge of where everything had been, and she held the lamp in her lap. The burned drop of oil had already hardened on the rim. Something that had taken months to grow, that strange, quiet happiness, that slow and tentative bloom, was gone in a single night, undone by a moment, undone by wanting to see. She did not weep, not yet. The sorrow was too large for weeping. It was the kind that sits in the chest and stays, the kind you carry with you like a stone you cannot put down. The sky began very slowly to lighten in the east. She watched it. She had nowhere else to look. And the world, which had once seemed so impossibly beautiful, stretched out before her now, vast and indifferent and cold, waiting to see what she would do next. She walked. That was all she could do, and so she did it. One foot, then the other, across ground that was hard and cold and indifferent beneath her. She did not know where she was going. She knew only that standing still felt like surrender, and she was not ready, not yet, to surrender. The road she followed was little more than a thread, through wild country, through fields gone pale with frost, through groves of trees that shed their leaves in slow, silent spirals around her. She passed through villages without stopping. She crossed a river by stepping stone to stepping stone, the water pulling at her ankles as though it wished she would stay. She kept moving, and then, as the light of the third morning came soft and gray over the hills, she came to a temple. It was old, older perhaps than the city she had been born in, older than the stories her nurses had told her as a child. Moss had crept up its columns like a patient green tide. The offerings on its altar were long decayed, scattered by birds and rain, and something in the stillness of the place told her that the God inside had not been attended to in many years. She climbed the steps and tidied what she could. She gathered up the rotting grain and the fallen garlands. She swept the floor with a branch she found outside. She set what little order she could manage over the beautiful, neglected ruin. It was a small act. It cost her almost nothing. But the gods, it seems, notice small acts, for it was here that Aphrodite found her. The goddess came the way storms come. First a heaviness in the air, then a stillness, then suddenly she was simply there, filling the threshold of the temple with a light that was not quite warm. She was beautiful, of course. She was always beautiful. But there was nothing gentle in her beauty now. It was the beauty of a blade, of a wave that comes too high and too fast. She looked at Psyche the way a sculptor might look at a piece of marble they intend to break down entirely before they begin. "So," she said, "you have finally stopped running." Psyche did not look away. She had wept all the weeping she had in her, and what remained was something quieter and harder. She met the goddess's gaze and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Aphrodite walked slowly around her, unhurried, as though time were a material she owned outright. She spoke of Cupid, that he was healing, that the burn on his shoulder was still raw, that love had made him foolish, and foolishness had made him careless. She said these things with a precision that was almost clinical, designed to land, and they did land. Each word found its mark in Psyche's chest. But then the goddess smiled, and the smile was the coldest part of all. "If you wish to call yourself worthy of what you have lost," she said, "then you will work for it. You will earn it, or you will be broken in the trying." And so the tasks began. The first was this: a great storeroom, vast and dim as a cathedral, heaped from floor to ceiling with seeds, millet and barley and lentil and poppy, all of it tumbled together into a mountain of impossible confusion. "Sort them," Aphrodite said, "all of them, before tonight." Then she was gone, and Psyche was alone with it. She stood in the doorway for a long time. The mountain of seeds rose before her, and she understood with perfect clarity that 1,000 women working for 1,000 years could not sort this by hand. She understood that this was not a task, it was a sentence, a beautiful, elaborate way of saying, "You will not succeed. You never could." She sat down on the floor, and then something moved. At first, she thought it was the seeds themselves, shifting, settling in the way that grain sometimes does. But then she saw them, a line, a column, a flowing river of small dark bodies moving across the stone floor toward the heap. Ants, hundreds of them, then thousands, then more than she could begin to count. They came from the cracks in the walls and the gaps beneath the door and the dark spaces between the stones. And they moved with the quiet, absolute purpose that ants have always moved with, since long before the gods gave things names. They worked through the afternoon and into the evening. They worked in the long violet hour before night, and by the time the first stars appeared in the small high window of the storeroom, it was done. The seeds lay in their separate hills, clean, sorted, precise, and the ants were gone as quietly as they had come. Psyche sat very still among the ordered piles and breathed. She did not know why they had helped her. She would never know. But she was beginning to understand something about this world she found herself in. That mercy comes in shapes you would never think to look for, that help sometimes arrives not through great gates, but through the smallest cracks in the wall. She carried that understanding with her into the second task. Across a wide meadow, Aphrodite told her there was a flock of sheep. Their fleeces were the color of sunlight, not yellow, not gold, but the precise shade of light itself at the fullest height of the afternoon. She was to gather a handful of that fleece and return with it. Simple, the goddess said, in the way that made clear it was anything but. What Aphrodite did not tell her, what she knew perfectly well, was that those sheep were not gentle animals. They were enormous and wild-tempered, prone to charging without reason. And in the heat of the day they were at their most volatile, their horns lowered, their hooves churning the earth. To walk into their midst was to invite being trampled. Psyche stood at the edge of the meadow and watched them move in the distance, gleaming like small suns. And then she heard it, a voice barely more than a whisper, and she was not entirely certain whether it came from the green reeds along the river bank at the meadow's edge, or whether the river itself was speaking. "Wait," the voice said, "only wait. In the heat of noon they are dangerous, but when the afternoon softens into evening, they will grow calm. They will sleep in the shade of the willows, and then the fleece they leave caught on the thorns and the low branches, the gold they shed without knowing, will be there for the gathering." She waited. The sun moved across the sky in its slow, indifferent arc. The shadows lengthened. The sheep, one by one, settled into the shade at the far edge of the meadow, and the whole field went quiet. And then Psyche walked along the river's edge, and the brambles and low branches gave up their treasure easily. Small tufts of golden fleece, soft as something remembered from a dream, caught on thorns like gifts left without a note. She gathered enough. She walked back through the cooling evening air with her hands full of gold. The third task was harder, darker. At the edge of the high mountains, where the rocks grew sheer and the air thinned to something barely breathable, there was a waterfall. It fell from a great height into a gorge so deep that its bottom lay in permanent shadow, and the water that fell was the water of the Styx, the river that wound through the underworld itself, which had found a crack in the world and come through here into the high, cold places. Before returning below, Aphrodite placed a small crystal vial in Psyche's hand. "Fill it," she said. From the fall itself, Psyche climbed. The path narrowed until it was barely a ledge. The sound of the water grew until it was everything, a roar that pressed against her from all directions. She came at last to the place where the water poured over the black lip of rock, and she leaned out over the void with the vial extended, and the water was so cold that her fingers went numb before she had drawn a breath. But there were creatures here, enormous serpents, moving in slow coils along the wet rock, guardians set to drive away any living thing that came too close. They turned their pale eyes toward her, and then from high above, so high that she could not see it clearly, only a shape against the white sky, an eagle came. It descended in slow, sweeping circles, and it took the crystal vial from her hand with a gentleness that seemed impossible for something so large and wild. And it dipped the vial into the cascading water with the precision of long purpose. And it rose again, and placed the filled vial back into her numb and trembling hands. She held it against her chest all the way down the mountain. She did not let go. And so it was that she arrived at the fourth task, and the fourth was the one that had no comfortable shape, no surface warmth. Aphrodite's voice was almost quiet when she gave it, which made it worse. "Go," she said, "into the underworld. Find Persephone, queen of that deep country, and ask her to place a small measure of her beauty into this box. Bring it back to me." Psyche held the small lacquered box in her hands and felt the full weight of what she was being asked. To go into the underworld, to go into the land of the dead while she was still living. She climbed to the high place she had been told of, a tower at the edge of a cliff, with a view that stretched to the horizon and beyond. She stood at its edge and looked down, and the wind came up around her, and for one long moment the world was nothing but distance and silence and the immense patience of stone. But the tower itself spoke to her, or something inside her spoke, some steadying voice she had not known she carried. It gave her careful instruction, each step laid out with the methodical tenderness of someone who genuinely wished her to survive. Take 2 coins for the ferryman. Take 2 honey cakes for the great hound who guards the gate. Do not help the lame man on the road. Do not assist the drowning man in the river. Do not, above all, open the box. Accept only what you have come for and carry it back without looking inside. She listened. She held every word like a stone she could stand on. And then she descended. The way down was long and grew darker by degrees, the way all deep things do. The light thinned from gold to gray to the dim, sourceless luminescence that is not quite light at all, but rather the absence of total dark. She paid the ferryman. She gave the honey cakes. She walked the gray road that wound through that vast and silent country, and she did not stop for the lame man, and she did not stop for the drowning man, and each refusal cost her something, cost her in that small, aching way that doing the necessary thing always costs when the necessary thing is not the kind thing. But she walked on. Persephone received her in a hall of pale stone, and the queen of that country had the look of someone who has made peace with something enormous. Not happiness, not quite, but a settled grace, a stillness that comes from having accepted the full shape of one's own life. She listened to Psyche's request without surprise. She placed what was asked into the box with quiet ceremony. She wished her well in the way that only those who know how seldom things go well can truly mean it. And then Psyche turned and walked back the long, dark road toward the living world. The coin, the cakes, the careful words, she used them all in reverse. She climbed the long corridor of deepening light. And finally, she came up out of the dark and stood once more beneath an open sky, with the small lacquered box in her hands and the thin, clean air of the world moving around her like a blessing. She had done it, all of it. She stood there in the light, breathing, and the light was so bright after the deep dark of below that her eyes filled, not with weeping, but with the simple, overwhelming relief of brightness after long shadow. The box was in her hands. It was small. It was sealed, she had been told, very clearly not to open it. She stood in the light and breathed, and slowly the thought began to form. She knew she should not open it. She had been told. The voice at the threshold, the warnings woven into every step of this long road, all of them had said the same thing. Do not look inside. Do not touch what is not yours to touch. And yet, Psyche turned the small box over in her hands. It was warm from her grip, though it had been cold when Persephone pressed it into her keeping. She thought of Cupid. She thought of how pale and wounded he had been when she last saw him, and she thought, with the particular, quiet logic of someone who has survived too much to be entirely sensible, that surely Persephone's beauty sleep, just a little of it, borrowed like a whisper, might make her worthy of him again, might smooth away the long weariness that the tasks had carved into her face, might let her stand before him without shame. She opened the box. There was no perfume, no light, nothing visible at all, only sleep, sudden, absolute, and deep as the dark she had just walked through. Psyche folded to the ground like a cloth slipping from a table, softly, without struggle, and lay still on the warm earth beside the road. The box rested in her open hand. The world moved around her. Birds, wind, the distant sound of water. And she heard none of it. She was not dead, but she was nowhere near waking. And so she might have remained for a very long time had someone not been looking for her. Not far from there, on silent wings, Cupid came. His wound had finally closed. The long, slow days of confinement had ended, and the moment he was free, he rose into the open sky the way a flame rises when a window is unlatched. Suddenly, completely, as if he had been waiting all along just for that small permission. He had been thinking of nothing but Psyche since the moment she left. Every task she faced, he had felt at a distance, helpless and aching. And now the ache had become motion, and the motion had brought him here, to this road, to this figure lying still in the sunlight. He landed beside her and knelt. For a moment he simply looked at her. The difficult roads had left their mark. There was a seriousness in her sleeping face that had not been there before. Something earned and quiet. He found he loved her more for it. Very gently he gathered the sleep from her skin, drew it back into the box the way you might gather smoke with your hands, carefully, with patience, and he sealed it shut. Then he bent close and woke her with the softest touch. Not a word, just presence, warmth, the feeling of being found. Psyche opened her eyes. She looked up at him in the golden afternoon light, and for a moment neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that the looking did not already say. She had crossed the world for him. He had flown to the edge of it for her. That was the whole story, and they both knew it. Then Cupid smiled and rose and took her hand and carried her story, their story, all the way to Olympus. Zeus heard it in full. The gods listened. Even Aphrodite, proud and difficult as she was, had grown tired of her own fury as anger always does when it is burned long enough without result. The room was very still when the telling ended, and then Zeus spoke, and his word was simple and final and kind. A cup was brought to Psyche's lips, ambrosia, the drink of the immortals, warm as sunlight and sweet as the first breath of a long-awaited morning. She drank, and she became. Not erased, not transformed into something cold and distant, simply completed. The mortal girl who had sorted seeds by starlight, who had waded into rivers and descended into the dark and carried impossible things home in her arms. She remained. But now she would not fade. They were married in the halls of Olympus as the long light of evening settled over the mountain. The gods celebrated with the gentle ease of those who have seen many things and know when something is worth marking. Laughter moved through the golden rooms. Somewhere music played, low and unhurried. And that is where we leave them. Two figures in a warm and ancient light, their long road finally behind them. Psyche, who loved without certainty and endured without bitterness. Cupid, who learned that even love must be patient with itself. Together at last, in the place where stories that have earned their rest are allowed to rest. The fire is low now, the night is full and soft around you. Let the story settle in you like warmth, like the last amber glow before sleep. You have carried it this far. You can set it down now.